So we keep it very local with our content. So whenever we do have a content break, it is very Massachusetts, South Coast focused, which is really cool. But when it comes to MMA and martial arts and kickboxing, I mean, the opportunities are endless. And for my style, I really like to stay conversational. I really like to try and ask questions that may have not been asked yet. I really try to steer clear of, so how's fight camp going? And, like, what do you hope to do for your next fight? I don't know, win? Like, so I try to stay clear of questions like that. But that does require, it does require a little bit of homework. So I usually creep on their social media pages, pick out some like weird or interesting posts, and I'll ask them about it. But then, I do a lot of reading articles about them, and I try to figure out like who they are as a person. And if I can kind of gauge of what kind of athlete they are and what kind of person they are, it'll allow me to ask a little more personal questions and deeper questions. I mean, I just did this podcast, so it's top of mind, but I just spoke with Stamp Fairtex, who has been fighting Muay Thai since she was 5 years old in Thailand, and she's fighting on the first ever one championship American card, like on American soil. And I'm reading all these articles, and I'm like, oh wow, like she's so incredible. But my first question was like, how does a 5-year-old get into combat sports? And then it just kind of opened up a conversation about culture and the differences of culture. And she was very candid that, it was for money. It was for money for her family, And we were able to talk about, how her strength and her motivation has really motivated younger women in the U.S. even and other countries to get into martial arts. So sometimes you're not going to find the written out question for you. Like, you really just have to like do the research and prep. And I like to view podcasting or interviewing as just like a phone call with a friend. Like, you're trying to catch up with a friend. Like, what would you ask a person that you haven't spoken to in a while, or that you've never met and you want to get to know? Like, what kind of questions are you going to ask, And I think that's why people kind of resonate with the podcast, is because they're hearing different sides of their favorite fighters that they may have not heard before.
Right. Yeah, asking that question that they haven't been asked, or maybe not haven't been asked but haven't been asked in a certain way, I think that is very key. I mean, there's a lot of people that will do that because they want the answer so they can get that clickbait, so they can do that kind of stuff. But like you said, it should just be a conversation between two people, like getting to know each other. And like I mentioned you before we started recording, it doesn't need to be robotic to where it's, hey, I got a question, you have an answer. Okay, you're done with your answer. I'm going to go to the next question, because something inside your answer, if your brain operates this way, it should trigger at least 10 other questions that you could be asking afterwards. And so,
totally.
I think that's also something people need to realize is, don't be so rigid with what your questions are. Always be open and fluid, like Bruce Lee, be fluid when it comes to what you want to do with the conversation, with the questions, and where you want to take the conversation.
Totally. I mean, I usually have about 5 or 6 questions that I write down and that I have prepared, and that kind of lets me steer the interview in a certain direction, but I leave plenty of room to expand upon it, or, maybe I won't get to that question, but at least I have an outline of where I want the conversation to go. And I think that's like another layer of a podcast that may be overlooked, is that you don't really want to jump around. You want to try and figure out a way to outline an episode where it has a nice flow to it, where, the storyline makes sense. Like, there's an end, or there's a start and there's an end. Like, you want it to have a nice flow to it. So that's really the main reason I write a couple questions down. But again, like, if you're confident enough to just like shoot the shit with somebody, like, It's great. It sounds better. It just sounds better.
Yeah. Now, I've run into this a couple times, and I try to, I'll call it, I play jazz with it. I just get creative and figure something out. What if you were trying to research somebody and it is like a dead end? Like it's an MMA fighter. No one's done an interview with them. You only find the Sheer Dog and the Tapology.
Yeah.
And
oh God.
only see fight highlights or whatever. Yeah.
The amount of times I've run into that. So, I'll be honest, that used to terrify me, and that used to be like, oh crap, like where is this going to go? But the more I do it, the more I realize it's actually, it's liberating, and it gives you so much more freedom to ask anything you want. Like, if there is no story out there, that means that you could be writing their story. So a lot of the times if I can't find anything on this person, I will start with like, how did you get into martial arts? Why do you love it? When did you start fighting? You get to be the person that asks all that, because it's not just regurgitated material that's already out there. Nobody's done it yet. So in a sense, it's kind of nice to have that fighter that's up and coming, because you get to give them the platform to tell their story of like, this is why I started. This is what happened to me. And, these are my goals. This is what I hope to get done. And then I typically will throw in pop culture questions too, because, it just makes it a little more fun. So you talk about what's going on in this week's headlines, and, you bond over that, and then you usually find out where they're from. So you ask about where they're from. And I think my advice for anyone that runs into that, where they're like, crap, I don't know anything about this fighter, embrace it. Embrace it and just get to know the person, because chances are your audience wants to get to know them too.
True. I kind of view the same thing as where, no one's talked to them yet. This is great, because, again, like you said, then you could tell their story, and they might even be more open to sharing stuff that you weren't even prepared for, because, you might be one of the first people that ever ask them about anything.
Totally. I've done a lot of like live show coverage, which is fun. Like not in the commentary booth, but being there for a media outlet like Fight Bananas, you get to do like the post-fight interviewing. And when you're in that lineup, they really do it by seniority a lot of the time. So, for like a UFC event, what's his name? John Morgan always gets the first question, and then it's, all right, then it's this outlet. And I'm usually on the lower end of the totem pole, and you're kind of just sitting there, and you're like, please don't ask my question. Please don't ask my question. And they usually do. So, like, you gotta get creative with that stuff if you want to, like, stand out and be different. But when it comes to, like, the up-and-coming fighters, you got a lot more freedom.
True. Yeah, I've talked to quite a few regional fighters, and, their stories are great because, again, they are hungry, very hungry. They want to get to that next level. Of course, they want to be on the bigger spotlight. So that's always fun. And then on the opposite side of it, I was lucky enough to talk to Bruce Buffer a couple weeks ago.
Whoa, that's awesome.
Oh, I know. I was fanboying out so hard, but I was trying to be as cool as possible. And he, again, I was going for every question that people have not asked him. So I listened to all the podcasts, not all of his because he's got too many at this point, all the podcasts he's been on, and almost every single one was the same. And I was like, okay, I'm definitely not asking him about his brother because everybody knows that story. The only thing I did ask him about his brother, I was like, so for Thanksgiving dinner, is it a fight over who does the prayer or the announcements, or how does that situation work? Try to make it as funny as possible.
Yeah, and it's different, right? And I think my biggest joy, or like when I give myself a pat on the back as an interviewer, is when the guest is kind of like taken aback by the question, where they're like surprised by it, and it's like fighters are constantly asked the same shit always. And they really appreciate it when they get that oddball question. So that's really cool. You had the chance to do that with the legend.
I know. I was like, oh, I need to do it in person someday, but this will work for now, and I'm okay with that.
That's great.
Now, what does your preparation look like for when you're actually calling fights?
Now that is, oh my gosh, that is probably the birth of my anxiety. I get so nervous. I will be honest. Luckily with a production like CES MMA, they have a great team, and because it's on UFC Fight Pass, they have a really awesome production team, and the producer does an amazing job of getting all the X's and O's together about the fighters, and then a few facts and that sort of thing. So luckily we have some good info on each fighter going into the fight. But it's a little tricky with commentary as a color commentator because I'm really just supposed to be talking about the action that's happening and kind of, in a sense, explaining it to the people at home. So there's really not much prep that goes into that. The only prep I'm really doing is making sure I understand who the fighters are, again, as people, to kind of bring flavor to the commentary booth. So being able to hone in on maybe what they said leading up to fight week during the media presser and where is he fighting out of? Does he have a wife and kids in the crowd? That's kind of how I like to prep, because when it comes down to it, I really can't prep for a fight that hasn't happened yet. So, I just try and make sure I know who I'm dealing with in a sense. And then, I have to kind of put away my imposter syndrome for a little bit and trust that I know what I'm talking about and just let it fly come fight night.
There you go. Yeah, I'm curious because so many people will either have a stack of notes, some people will just have a couple that they'll just want to put out there. I was just curious what your whole situation was when it came to calling the fights.
Yeah, I definitely have a good amount of, I'd say I have a page of notes, it's just nice to look down at. Now, am I using it every time? Not usually. But it's almost like a crutch, it's nice to know that if I get lost in the discussion or if there's dead air or if there's kind of a pause in the action, I'm comfortable being able to look down and see notes and be like, okay, let me just pick one of these bullet points, So it's wonderful to have a excellent production team behind you. But when you don't have that production team, I do a lot of research with each fighter of just you're looking at their topology and you're looking at how their last performance was and what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. It's a lot of watching tape, it's a lot of reading, and then it's a lot of organizing.
Now, speaking of the fight game, you do it all day and then you also come home to it because your husband is karate combat champion Ross Levine.
Yes, he is.
How did y'all meet?
We met at the gym. So I'm from Rhode Island, and I have been training at Pride Martial Arts since I started. So that was 8 years ago now. And my husband is from Brooklyn, and at the time he had moved to Rhode Island for someone else. He was in a relationship, and he had a job in physical therapy, but he was looking for a home gym, and he decided to try out Pride, and he loved it. And over time, we became friends. We were teammates. We were friends, and his relationship didn't work out. The one I was in didn't work out, and he slid in the DMs, and he said, hey, if you ever need somebody to talk to, I'm here. I was like, oh, God. But it worked. So, that was a while back, and we've been hanging out ever since.
That's one way of putting it, yeah.
Yeah.
So how are you on fight night?
Oh, I'm a mess. I wish I could be like, I'm so calm, cool, and collected. I'm totally chill. Yeah. I'm not. I freak. I'm internally freaking out. When we first started dating, and he was still an amateur when we first started dating, and when he turned professional, I started being in his corner.